don't believe the hype about Mercury retrograde, or at the very least, see the hype in a different way. More on that in a moment. But if you would like to understand a little bit more about what this Mercury retrograde cycle is likely going to deliver to you, why not schedule in one of my Empower Hour consultations and learn how to work well with this energy? You can find the link to do so just above. So, can you be awake while you're sleeping? The answer to that question is actually yes, right? I think the concept is called lucid dreaming. I used to do it when I was a teenager, but there's one little thing about lucid dreaming to pay attention to, which is when you're lucid dreaming or awake in your sleep, you're still having a dream. And the interesting thing about that particular experience is sometimes you find yourself in a unique position of being able to direct the dream because you're awake in the dream. Now, in your life, in one area of your life or another, and that's going to be dependent upon where this Mercury retrograde cycle is taking place in your horoscope, in addition to planets that it might be forming aspects and many other things. But in one area of your life or another, you're likely taking a look at yourself and how you're interacting with that area of your life. And yes, it may all start off with a little bit of discomfort. If you can make it through that energy of discomfort around the full moon, which is on the same day as Mercury stations retrograde in Hasta Nakshatra, if you can move past that discomfort, inspiration will soon follow. If you can take that energy even more, and rather than going, I don't want to look at myself, I don't want to try to understand where I've been ignorant. It's hard enough, it's hard enough having to do that once a year. I'd much rather just walk around ignorant all the time, pretending I'm not ignorant, rather than taking a look at the fact that I'm ignorant. Guess what? I'm ignorant. Yep, I'll be the first to admit it. I'm ignorant. We're all ignorant, but we don't like to take a look at ourselves. Now, what would happen if you decided, you know what? I'm going to passionately explore myself. No, not that way. I mean, passionately do inward self-exploration in terms of letting yourself understand yourself a little bit more, going into all those areas that perhaps have been hidden to you, that perhaps have been covered up or in the shadows inside of yourself. Really taking a look at those things where you perhaps haven't been paying attention, and look at how you might be able to pay a little more attention. Now, I am by no means suggesting that you give yourself a hard time, that you self-flagellate, or anything like that. I'm instead suggesting that you just be willing to take a deep enough look to start a cycle off. And then you'll likely find that through doing that, through being able to be awake and bear witness to a situation, something miraculous will happen. A block will move out of the way. Something will flow to you that has previously been kept at bay. And when your hands open up to being receptive to the situation as it's occurring, because your mind is awakening and no longer afraid to take a look, something pretty big will begin to shift. Now, let's talk about Mercury retrograde a little bit before we go back into this. There's a lot of, talk between people, as I'm sure everywhere in like on social media, everybody you interact with, you always hear, all these really big horror stories about Mercury retrograde and how Mercury retrograde's a bad thing. Guess what? Mercury retrograde is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, anything that the planets do to you is not a bad thing. It may bring difficulty into your life. Anything can bring difficulty into your life, but it's not a bad thing. Mercury retrograde, when Mercury is stationing and in its retrograde motion, something really powerful is happening. Because in order for a planet to be retrograde, it has to be closest in its orbit to the Earth. Now, guess what? When a planet is closest to its orbit to the Earth, and I don't mean like super, super close because planets have different, in terms of their orbital paths, there are different proximities. But let's say closer to the Earth than it has been at other times of the year. When a planet is retrograde and therefore closer to the Earth than it is at other times of the year, its rays are able to transmit to the Earth more effectively. What creates the disconcerting experience of Mercury being retrograde is the fact that Mercury is, in fact, more powerful than it usually is. In Vedic astrology, when a planet's retrograde, it has really strong chestabala, which is behavioral strength, right? Which means on a certain level, when a planet has strong behavioral strength, then with that particular planet, if that's a planet in our birth chart, it's less likely to become erratic. In terms of the transit that we're experiencing with Mercury retrograde, it's just that Mercury hits us in a very profound way and awakens us to looking at Mercury in a manner that we haven't really paid attention to it before. It wakes us up in a manner where we had previously been ignorant, and it causes us to internalize a process rather than being able to externalize and run our mouth all the times and engage with things and have them work perfectly fine and see ourselves as being the skilled person who's really making everything happen in existence. Instead, Mercury retrograde will go, I'm going to kind of like take you out of doing mode to a certain extent. So you're more in an internalizing and intuitive modality and perhaps a bit more reflective. In short, I'm going to help you to wake up. Now, with this particular cycle of Mercury retrograde, there's a full moon forming an aspect to Mercury. The moon is full in Purva Bhadrapada Nakshatra. There is another video that I've done on that. If you want to find that, I'll place the link to that up above just here for you. But these two planets, Purva Bhadrapada and Hasta Nakshatra, which is where Mercury is going to be for the initial part of its retrograde transit, all the way up until the 21st. And that's what this video is about, Mercury's transit through Hasta. We'll do one on Uttara Falguni too when it gets closer. But both of those planets are in what are called passive nakshatras. So there's a very receptive energy, even more so, to this particular Mercury retrograde period. There's also an alignment being formed between Jupiter and Mercury as Jupiter is transiting the Uttara Bhadrapada. Uttara Bhadrapada tends to reveal things to us. And with the revelation of that energy, we tend to have the capacity to passionately direct our energy in a particular direction to get the flow going, to get the juices going, as it were, in a manner that can create some positive change. Now, here is the interesting thing. If you place yourself in the position during this Mercury retrograde transit of thinking, what a good boy or what a good girl I am. Look at this really great job that I'm doing. I'm creating this and this is happening because I'm doing this. There's nothing, wrong with congratulating yourself for waking up. But if you become too self-congratulatory in terms of you being the one who's doing, you're going to miss a really great opportunity. And that great opportunity relates to the concept of lucid dreaming whilst you're awake. Because at that point, you're the one who is actively being involved in the dream of creation and taking that beingness and actively doing at the same time. Because you're actively reflecting, receiving the gift of that reflection, and externalizing that gift and putting plans into action based upon that. In short, if you're willing to take a look, you will be rewarded. And if you could use a little bit of help knowing how best to work with this Mercury retrograde cycle in your personal horoscope, again, I highly recommend experiencing an empowered approach to astrology through my Empower Hour consultations. You can find a link to those just above. That's going to do it for this look at Mercury's transit, blah, 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 blah. Mercury's transit. Maybe I'm kind of getting that Mercury energy early, right? Wait a second, transmission coming in. Oh, no, seriously, that's going to do it for this look at Mercury's transit through Hasta Nakshatra in retrograde motion, which takes place from the 10th to the 21st of September 2022. Until next time, please do take the very best care of yourself. Bye now.